What's up guys, KS here. Thanks for joining me today as always. So in a moment of transparency, I have to say I've made this video probably 5 or 6 times. I've been promising this for a while now, but I keep going back and forth with both of these guns. I think they're both absolutely fantastic, and I've had a very difficult time trying to narrow down what my favorite one is, or at least the winner of it if I could only have one. But here we go, we're going to give it a try again and see what happens. So as a reminder, of course, in this series, we do take a look at two guns, whether similar or in some cases very different, and go over stats, features, and of course there will be shooting along the way. We'll check out the triggers, and at the end, I will announce a winner. But of course, here's the thing, guys. Both of these guns are fantastic. I've said it several times already. If you're interested in either one, you're doing great. It's just an opportunity to challenge myself and perhaps challenge you to take a step back and choose one so there can be only one. Now, both of these guns have a lot going for them. They're popular, well-made, duty-capable, and just a ton of fun to shoot. They have interesting yet different features, which makes each one a worthy candidate for your collection. Both represent the manufacturer's entrant into the military handgun trials, or at least about as close as we're going to get for now. That means they're built like tanks, capable of enjoying tens of thousands of rounds without complaint. So let's jump in and take a look. Alright, now you guys will also notice the black background is back right now because these guns both just kind of disappear into the wood of the table. Now the camera's probably going to bitch and moan a little bit about this, but hopefully it won't be entirely too bad. In terms of specs, and I probably won't admittedly go over every single one of them, I just kind of want to give you guys an idea of where these two stack up because they are darn close. Now the 509 on the bottom is going to be just a hair bigger almost all the way around. Now of course it's got the threaded barrel, it's got the suppressor sights, which we'll talk about, all of that. But again, these guys are really close. Now, the weight is going to be just a little bit different. The 509 is going to be about 27.9 ounces versus 24.83 ounces, something like that on the Glock 19. So there is a little bit of a weight difference there, but otherwise, again, these guys are pretty close. Now, in terms of magazines, for the 509, we do have a 17-round flat-base magazine here. However, interestingly, it also came with two 24-round magazines, which is pretty cool. Now, I said it in the original video, and I'll say it again. In terms of practicality for the majority of us, this probably isn't going to be carried very often. Although if you do, good on you. It just probably wouldn't be something that I would. However, certainly at the range or maybe a duty application, this is pretty darn cool. Now, I'm going to stick with the 17-round magazine for the time being. Now, the Glock is going to do things a tiny bit differently, of course. Again, it's got a flat-base 17-round magazine right here, typical Glock magazines, which I like quite a bit, by the way. But it also comes with two 19-round magazines. So they're basically 17-round magazines with the +2 Glock extension on them. And I'm a huge fan of these extensions. In fact, I use them on a lot of my magazines just to give a couple of extra rounds. And plus, I think they actually kind of look cool. So just to give you a little bit of an idea in terms of magazines. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the features for a moment or two. I'm going to try and keep this brief. We've talked a lot, especially about the 19X. But a couple of things about it. Of course, it does carry forward the Gen 4 and Gen 5 grip texture. I actually like this grip texture a lot. I think it does a good job. It's bitey enough and it's comfortable enough that you could certainly conceal carry it all day long, not a problem. But there's definitely enough grip there to keep it planted in the hand, or at least I think so. Now, what they did not carry forward with the Gen 5 to the 19X are going to be the Magwells. So they actually did away with that and made it flat, but they did put this little lip right here. And some people have really praised this because it allows you to get a little bit more of a purchase on the gun if you've got bigger hands. It doesn't bother me one way or the other, except Gen 5 magazine base plates for like maybe a 17. They aren't going to work because they extend out just a little bit more. So I imagine there are going to be some people that are going to Dremel that right off, and that's fine. And then it does come with a lanyard loop, and a lot of people have taken that out as well. It doesn't bother me one way or the other. Now, it does, of course, come with some back straps, so you can make it a little bit more modular, a little bit more comfortable to you. One thing I would have liked to have seen would be a little bit of a recess right here to help clear any magazine malfunctions. I think all guns, especially duty grade or military grade, should come with that. Perhaps that's just an opinion. Now, it does have a magazine release on the left side only. It is not ambidextrous, although you can switch it. It's not too big of a deal. It's pretty easy to do. There's a little internal bar there. Just flip it and flip your release around. But they did carry forward the Gen 5 ambi slide lock slide release, release, which is great. And I think a lot of left-handed shooters have really enjoyed the Gen 5 and even the 19X for that feature. Now, of course, it does have an accessory rail for your lights, lasers, chainsaws, that sort of thing. And there are a couple of little grooves right here on the front of the trigger guard if you want to use that as a reference. I don't typically, but it's nice to be there just to have, just in case. Now, of course, we'll come back to the trigger here in just a moment, but in terms of safety, it does have the standard Glock safety lever right here. This must be depressed for the trigger to work. So again, same as every other Glock. In terms of takedown, it's a standard Glock takedown right here. We've got our takedown tabs on both sides. You do have to pull the trigger, of course, and then you'll pull your slide back about 1/8 of an inch or so, and you'll depress these tabs, and then the slide will come right off. All right, let's take a look at the 509 for a moment or two. And there's actually a lot going on with the 509. Now, in terms of the grip texture, it is definitely more aggressive than the Glock. It is fairly similar to maybe the FNS, that sort of thing, although I feel like they've actually tapered it off or tapered it down just a little bit. But actually, I like the grip texture on this a lot. It's certainly very bitey, and it does have additional back straps, so you can make this, again, a little bit more modular. It comes with 2, but I believe there's actually a 3rd that's even bigger than this one. So this I would consider kind of a medium. The small one's actually going to be a little bit more flat, so at least there's a little bit of flexibility in there. Now, you'll see that there is actually a little bit of an indentation right there, so it makes it a little bit easier to strip out your magazines, and any of your 509 magazines will work with this. I had a couple extra lying around from my original 509, and that's worked quite well for me. Now, they do have a different texture as you move up the grip, and I like this. I mean, it just adds a kind of a different flavor there, and it's very, very comfortable. I mean, I feel like both the Glock and the FN sit really well in the hand. Now, in terms of controls, the magazine release out of the box, believe it or not, is ambidextrous. Now, one thing I have found with this, with my grip, and I feel like I've got a pretty normal, pretty average grip here. Sometimes my middle finger will kind of rub up against the magazine release. I've never had a problem with the magazine actually coming out or anything like that. I'm not putting that much pressure on it, but again, it can be a mild irritant and not too big of a deal. Now, we do have our slide lock slide release, and it does jut out just a little bit, which is kind of nice, and it is ambi, of course, on both sides. So they've really made the controls on this as flexible as possible, so pretty much any shooter can use it. Now, the takedown is going to be a little bit different than the Glock. Now, this has the takedown lever, so you do have to pull this down, and then you can take your slide off after you depress the trigger. So it does it a little bit differently, but it accomplishes the same thing. Once again, your accessory rail for your lights, lasers, chainsaws, as you would expect. And that's pretty much it for the frame on this, but I like it. I like both of these. They're different. They feel different in the hand, but I think they both do a great job. Now, one last thing before I forget with the trigger, it is a hinge design, still a safety, so the hinge does have to be depressed for you to make the trigger work. So again, no thumb safety or anything like that on either of these. All right, we'll take a look at the slides for a moment or two, and I really like the 19X slide. It actually is just a little bit more matte finish than the Gen 5, so I think you get just a little bit more of a grip on it, and I like that quite a bit. Now, they don't have the front serrations. I still think that's a little bit of a bummer. I know I make more of a fuss out of it than some people do, but I just kind of wish they'd carried that forward. But the back serrations do a great job, and it's just pretty standard fare. Now, the finish is held up really well. I know it looks like it's marked up, but it actually is not. And I've had this 19X now for a while. It's got quite a few rounds through it, but again, it's held up very nicely. Now, in terms of sights, I've done things a little bit different. The 19X does come with standard Glock night sights, which actually are pretty good, but I threw on a pair of Trigicon HDs. I just prefer these sights. They're a little bit easier for me to see. I really like them. They're the HD front, and then we've got our back with the serration on it, so I'm cheating a little bit with the sights. Now, the rest of the gun, of course, is stock right now, especially for this review. Now, before I forget, one other thing they did with the 19X, as well as the Gen 5s, they actually tapered the front of it a little bit. And I have to say, I like this quite a bit. I think it cleans up the lines, even though I know some people prefer the more squared off look. I just prefer this. Now, some people kind of dog the initial Gen 5s that came out because the frame wasn't tapered to match the slide. They've corrected that. So all in all, I think it's a really good looking package. All right, let's take a look at the slide of the FN for a moment or two. In terms of serrations, we do have both front and back serrations, and they're really grippy. They do a great job. They allow you to manipulate that slide pretty much any way you want to do it. And the rest of the milling on the slide, I think, is really attractive. And the finish has held up quite well, as has the Glock 19X. And I think it's just a really sharp looking design. Now, of course, there's something that probably catches your attention really quickly. You'll notice that it's actually cut for a red dot, and it's cut for actually most any common red dot out there. It comes with a couple of different plates, so you can really put whatever you want on this. Now, I threw the Vortex Venom on and kind of played around with it, and it worked really well. And they've made this so you don't have to Loctite it down or anything like that. It's got little O-rings and all that in there, so there's a little bit of pressure coming back on the red dot. So it just makes it a lot easier and a lot more flexible to move this around. Now, one thing, and I said it in the original video, you'll notice it does have these ears right here on it that come outside of the sights. And at first I thought this might be a bit of a distraction, but I've not found it to be so at all. In fact, it's kind of cool. They serve an interesting purpose. You'll notice there's some little ledges right there, rather. And actually, this helps you manipulate the slide without having to worry about hitting the sight at all. So it's protecting the sight if you have to do any one-handed manipulations or anything like that. And frankly, I think it's fine. I think it serves its purpose, and it doesn't look too bad. Now, another thing about this, you actually retain the rear sights if you take off the plate and put on a red dot, because as you can see, we've got suppressor height sights on it, and that's great. I mean, it was forward thinking by them, and they allow you to fully co-witness with this depending on the red dot that you put on there, and I love it. But these sights are actually really good. They are night sights, as you would expect, but there's a little bit of an HD call out on the front. I would have loved to have seen yellow. I'm a little bit picky on that, but it still does a great job. And there are your rear sights, some serration on the bottom, and they're a little bit indented on the top. So again, it makes it just really easy to pick up, just the same as the Glock. Now, the stock sights on the Glock probably weren't quite as good, at least for my eyes, but especially with those Trigicons on there, it's done a great job. So both of these guns have really, they've done a great job in terms of features and stats and all of that, and they're just, again, both a joy. In terms of shooting, both of these guns are a lot of fun and equally capable. Now, I find that they have some slightly different shooting characteristics, however, one of which being the 509 is a little bit more top-heavy, or at least it feels that way to me. Not by a lot, it's a pretty small margin, but I do notice that, so it takes maybe a fraction of a second for me to get back on target with it. However, it's certainly very capable, and with a good sight lineup, which it definitely has, that front sight's pretty easy to pick up and to get back on target, as well as the ergonomics. I mean, it is certainly a very capable gun. Now, in terms of the Glock, I mean, Glocks to me are just, they're a lot of fun. I've been shooting them for a long time, and so I always feel pretty at home when I'm shooting a Glock. I enjoy the fact that they're relatively flat shooting, and the triggers are pretty expected. I know that seems like an odd thing to say, but a Glock trigger's a Glock trigger, and you just kind of get used to them. And of course, I'll talk more on the triggers here in just a moment. But like I said, again, these guns are just a lot of fun to shoot. All right, let's talk triggers for a moment or two. All right, with the FN, like I said before, this does have the hinge on it, so once you get your hinge out of the way and depressed, you've got a little bit of take-up right here, and it's not the cleanest take-up. I can feel a tiny bit of grit. It's not bad. I mean, it really isn't. It's hardly noticeable, but there is just a little bit there. I mean, you can see that I'm kind of fighting the trigger. And then once you get to your wall, it's a nice defined wall, and then your break is really crisp. It's audible. It feels good. Now, this is coming in under 6 pounds. It's probably about 5 3/4 pounds if I remember correctly. So not the lightest trigger out there, but it feels pretty good. And then your reset is right there. Again, it's crisp, it's audible. I mean, it's a great reset. And then you're back out to the start. Of course, I'll do this again. We've got our take up, a little bit of grit in there, not too bad. And there's our wall. And there's our break. Again, very crisp break. And then the reset is right there, and then we're back out to the wall. In terms of triggers out of the box, this really isn't too bad. Now, I think there's a little bit of room for improvement on this, more on that at a later time, but it definitely does the job. All right, as for the Glock trigger, and again, I'll say it, Glock triggers are pretty predictable. Now we have our safety lever right here. Once we get that depressed, we've got a little bit of take up, and there isn't any grit with this. However, it's a tiny bit longer, but it feels good. I mean, it's really good. And then we've got a wall, and then our break, right there. Again, it's a crisp break. I mean, it feels really pretty good. In fact, this is probably one of the better Glock triggers out of the box that I have felt. So, maybe I got lucky. I don't know. But then our reset is right there. And I've always said this. I love Glock resets. They're predictable, they're audible, they're tactile, they feel really good while shooting. So again, we've got our take up and then to our wall. There's our break and our reset right there. And this one's actually coming in about 5.5 pounds. So it's pretty similar to the 509. But again, in terms of triggers, both of these guns are great. I think anybody would enjoy shooting these guns, and the triggers definitely do their part. All right, so here we are, guys. It's time to announce a winner. And like I said before, this has been quite challenging because I think both of these guns are absolutely fantastic, and both have a lot of merits. Both are a lot of fun. I mean, the Glock has been great. This has been kind of a lesson learned for me, certainly in terms of getting to know this and actually discovering that I'm liking more and more the lack of finger grooves and just the feel of this. And so much so that I've changed up another Glock in the lineup. More on that at a later time. But it's a lot of fun. It's predictable. If you've been behind Glocks for a while, it does exactly what it needs to do. The trigger out of the box on this one was fantastic. Now the sights were okay with the night sights, but I prefer the Trigicon lineup there. But otherwise, I think it's been great. And the 3 magazines with the 2 19-round magazines, it's actually a pretty good value there as well. So the Glock has been a lot of fun. That said, I have to say that the FN 509 has been a little bit of a culture shock for me. Last year I reviewed the regular 509. I thought it was an okay gun, but it just didn't wow me very much. But when I got my hands on this with the additional features, especially the red dot plate and the sights, the suppressor height sights with the HD call out on it, and then the color scheme of this as well, and the threaded barrel. You guys know I run cans from time to time. It has just really impressed me a lot. And although it's a little bit more expensive than the Glock, without question, I think you're getting a lot of features for the money. And then of course with the 24-round magazines, you can have fun for a long time, no doubt about that. So it just really has been kind of a fun discovery. So at the end of the day, I have to say, and this again, I could go back and forth again another time on this, but right now as it stands, if I could only have one, believe it or not, it would be the FN 509 Tactical. So there it is, guys, and I hope that's the end of it right there, and I hope I don't try and make another video. I want to be done with this, but I'm really excited to hear what you guys have to say about this. If you agree or disagree, if you've got some experience with both of these, I'm always looking forward to that and having a conversation with you. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.